Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me here. I'm Leslie McIntosh. I live in the UK, although I'm from the States, and my disclosures are I work for a company called Digital Science. I used to be a researcher, developed products actually that developed trust markers, and then that was acquired by Digital Science. So speaking of which, here was my colleagues and I implementation of the trust markers that had grown really and evolved since 2017. And we started out with looking at the reproducibility of papers and then realized that we needed to look at the transparency that were reported within papers and then realized that we really should check out the authorship if we really want to look at trust in the research. So as our definition, it was individual elements important to understand, classify, and categorize trust in science as exhibited generally within the publications, but that's also the contributors, the authorship of that. This becomes important in this case because this had been evolving, this was working, and looking at authorship and really what is an author, because we had identified the fact that there were fake authors and had to even figure out what does it mean to be an author on a paper in a research journal, and looking at the education, the experience, the training. That was a little bit more difficult than understanding the transparency or the reproducibility. And so I'd been looking at this, and this came up. This was March of 2022, before Twitter got musky. It was a very good place for scientists to go. And this person talked about their paper being plagiarized, and I thought that would be very interesting to see if I could detect plagiarism, a plagiarized paper based on trust markers rather than the language that was within the paper. So I'm looking at this orthogonally. So this is how it started. Now, this is not the plagiarized paper. I picked another one from the network so you wouldn't go and find somebody who's trying to stay de-identified, but it's from the same group. And I want to point out a couple of things. One is looking at the authors, right? That's one of the first key areas of trust markers. And nothing says, I trust you or I don't trust you. These are markers. These are signals, the fingerprint, whether we can figure out whether it's a real clue or not. And you see some educational affiliations and you see some non-educational affiliations. But we've already established that many of us use non-institutional affiliations. But this was interesting for two reasons. One is using hotmail.com as a young researcher is very odd, no matter what country it's from. Okay? If you're a professor who's been there for 30 or 40 years, having Hotmail is perfectly normal, okay? Not for a young researcher. Also having the MSU dash and the underscore was very odd. Usually a person has a Gmail account and they, it's Lisa Librarian. And Lisa, if you're here, I'm picking on you because I love your Gmail. The next thing that was interesting was the funder. Now, I am able to use Dimensions, and within Dimensions, it has identified organizations. These are now part of ROAR. They were called GRID at the time. These are IDs that go with organizations, and if it's not hyperlinked, then it means it wasn't within our database. So the original one that I saw was actually a funding statement, and it was very similar to this. The authors concede the support by the Pharmakon Neuroscience Research Network. Maybe we were missing it within our database. So I started looking at what is this? Maybe it's a funder, a grant rather than a funder. But I started exploring this. Notice I'm doing this just a one-off case study at this point. When I plugged it into Dimensions, though, and I obviously you don't see the time after this because this is the beginning of 2022, I saw an absolute extreme increase in the use of this Pharmakon Neuroscience network that hadn't been used before. So I was using it as a full text, and I thought that was interesting, unless that was a grant and they were very prolific. But then I started looking at the network, and I don't have a picture of that here, but it had one central player but it had 120 publications and 331 unique authors. Now, if I were to add the 2 papers that have a large number of authors, that adds 30 more authors to this. So if you are an author on a large author paper, know who your co-authors are. Because these are some, I would say, legitimate researchers who got involved with this, what ends up being a citation cartel and an authorship for sale network, and they probably didn't know that. The 331 unique authors here probably did. Having a total of over 7,000 citations for these 120 publications within just a number of years. The other thing that I'm showing you on this is that the field of research, which I was very interested in knowing, is neuroscience. In particular, there are a lot of Alzheimer's research studies. So at the same time, note that some other falsified data came out at the same time that this network is propagating misinformation and disinformation within that same field. So where were the organizations? This was 2022. I had found the person. It was in Retraction Watch. 2025, over Christmas in 2024, I decided I really wanted to see where things were now. And I want to look at the organizations. And there's 232 organizations that were affiliated with the authors. So it's not the ones that are mentioned in the paper, but they're affiliated with the authors. 212 of those have identifiers, which means they're identified as institutional entities, which becomes important. One thing before I go to the next slide that I want to point out is that the only continent not represented in here is Antarctica. So anyone who thinks that this is a problem of just one geographical area or that we can say that it's one country or another, I say, let's take a look again, and hopefully by the end I will have convinced you. What I was very interested in these organizations is the ones without grid, which is the ROR, the IDs with the institutions. And then it was to determine, was it our problem, as in our database didn't have that, or was it a problem that the organization didn't have an identifier and it either wasn't what we would call a legitimate organization, or it wasn't it wasn't identified elsewhere. And I want to bring your attention to not the first one, but the second one in Australia and the third one in Austria. And the Novel Global Community Educational Foundation, who plenty of people within this network are affiliated with, that is a house in the suburbs of Sydney, Australia. The AFNP is a flat in the middle of Vienna above a massage parlor, if you want to know. There's also another house that is in the suburb of California that is in here, but there are people that are within this organization that are still publishing, that affiliate themselves with this organization and say they're a head of a department and whatnot. So we need to decide, what do we consider a legitimate institution when we are publishing in the scientific realm. Now, this led to a paper that my colleague Simon Porter and I worked on, identifying authorship for sale. But let me just say, this does a really good job of identifying one authorship for sale network. It's the young, it's from many countries at a young age, and they have a very specific type of network that we can analyze. It's not looking at those that are more established right now. We're still working on algorithms for that. But I want to get to the very last thing for the last 30 seconds, and that is, where are people now? And I wanted to look at those who did not have any funding before Pharmacon, but those that now have funding. And I actually want to update this, because what in my code, I forgot to put the equals 2022, and I just put greater than 2022. So if you take Anyone who participated in Pharmacon who did not have any funding before 2019 and did have funding in 2022 or later, you have over $3 million worth of legitimate grants in US equivalent dollars that they have received now, so they're moving from illegitimate ways of publishing to legitimate ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this interesting story. Cheating pays, it seems to be. John.
Johnny and Edie Stanford, fascinating story. Some of these institutions probably were real institutions and legitimate institutions, but were the affiliations real? In my experience, in many of these cases, these quote-unquote authors, they use affiliations like University of California, big institutions, but nobody knows that they're there. Did you try to verify?
So out of all 331, we have not done all of that matching. I will tell you, when you go to the funding, the ones that I put up there match to the institutions that they say they're at. You can find them at that institution. So there is matching that they are at those institutions. Again, these are more of I haven't looked at some of the ones that only published one paper, and that's something to explore further, but a lot of them are at the institutions they say they are at, I know, which is, yeah.
Please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Jen. I'm from the SAGE Research Integrity team, and I was kind of wondering, how did you research and investigate the affiliations that you ended up not being able to verify?
So I downloaded a spreadsheet, and we curated every single one of those, and then reached out within my network, because some of it we wanted to figure out. For instance, there was a lot that were in India, and those were not matched correctly within our system. So I reached out to somebody that I know, Achal Agrawal, who is in India and knows the institutions and could help me sort those out. But a lot of that was manual curation with a little wine on a Friday night.
So just Googling and looking up, pulling the thread?
It was, but it always helped to find somebody who was in the country who could help navigate. For instance, there was one, and unfortunately I reached out to a friend on a Friday and she answered, who is in Ireland, because I was curious about this one organization that was in Ireland, and she knew where to go to see where businesses are registered, how it was registered, and be able to help me that I didn't know how to navigate within that country. So that was the way that it was triangulated, if you will.
One more question. Did you ever ask the authors about their affiliation, or was this investigation just solely personal and confidential?
So the very first person was at a university, was at an established university in Hong Kong, and you can look at the Retraction Watch article in 2022. And I did reach out to the research integrity officer there, spoke to him. They were fantastic to work with. They were very quick to work with. And then I used someone who had experience in journalism to reach out so that I wasn't breaking any laws or doing anything nefarious myself unknowingly. And so we did. Just to let you know, he left that university and then popped up in 2025 at another university, and they had reached out. So that is the only person directly that has been reached out to. The other people, it's indirect, either through the university itself, which a lot of research integrity officers have been notified, because there was one group, we think they traded the translation services for authorship, and it's in a country that is very sensitive to that. We didn't want anything to happen to the young researchers, and so their research integrity officers were taking care of that.
So much.
Yeah, just congratulations on your research. It's fascinating. We had the same problem where we were investigating the institutional affiliations as they were reported in published articles, and authors who had a Chilean-based affiliation, multiple affiliations. And we used Google back then. This was 2018, 2019. So we could only look for any kind of evidence of a linkage between the author and the affiliation using Google. So maybe now with AI, things will get a little faster and easier to check. And I think we have to be very focused on how different interests and stakeholders are gaming the metrics.
Yes, thank you.